Nicholas Sterling had everything that could be owned and nothing he truly wanted. His life was a string of boardrooms and ballrooms, the son of a dynasty that had shaped skylines. Sterling Global wasn't just a company, it was an empire of glass and steel, whispered about on every continent. And Nicholas, heir and CO, bore its weight on his shoulders like a crown polished until it gleamed but pressed so hard it cut. He wore perfection like a suit, sharp, immaculate, unyielding. His penthouse alone was worth more than most neighborhoods, a seamless spread of glass walls, marble floors, and an uninterrupted view of the city that stretched beneath him like conquered land. In public he never faltered. At banquets he smiled politely as aristocrats praised him. At charity galas he played the dutiful son, the immaculate face of sterling power. Even in silence, he carried the aura of wealth so intoxicating that people bent without realizing they were already bowing. But Nicholas knew something the others refused to admit. Wealth bought obedience, not love. It bought silence, not peace. At the end of every night, when the glass doors shut and the city below throbbed indifferent, he stood entirely alone. That was the secret no press release ever printed. He had lovers, yes, all hand-chosen women of society, heiresses, influencers, world-class beauties. But they were careful, curated relationships that ended neatly before anyone could get messy. He never risked. He never stumbled. He never allowed love that burned outside the lines of convenience. Until her. It was at a Sterling Foundation banquet, in one of those museums where marble columns gleamed under chandeliers and the air hummed with wealth. The usual crowd buzzed like bees feeding off opulence. Waiters glided with crystal glasses. Cameras flashed along red carpets. Nicholas, dressed in a midnight suit tailored to perfection, moved through conversations effortlessly but without care. Then he saw her. She wasn't supposed to be there. He knew nearly every name on the guest list. His mother kept it curated like her garden roses, perfect, prickly, predictable. But this woman was different. She stood apart from the ripples of wealth, her expression marked not by hunger but by wonder. She was studying a sculpture tucked near the side, her fingers hovering close as though touching air was reverent enough. Her dress was plain compared to the sequined excess around her. Black, modest, understated. Her dark hair was swept loosely, strands tumbling carelessly in a way that only made her presence sharper against the crowd's airbrushed gloss. She should have blended in as invisible next to diamond necklaces and imported gowns. Instead, she seemed to carry a gravity of her own. Nicholas found himself watching her longer than he allowed. Long enough to realize he had no idea who she was. He approached, footing silent on marble, masking curiosity as politeness. "Most of the guests are either networking or drinking," he said smoothly. "You seem more interested in the art." She turned, startled, and her eyes met his. Steady. Alive. Not the cautious gaze of someone recognizing a sterling. Not the calculating flicker of someone measuring his net worth. It was simply a look. A quiet look that met him as a man. "Maybe because the art isn't trying to impress anyone," she answered calmly. He arched an eyebrow. "You think the people are?" "I think the people forgot why they came," she said, half smiling. "Charity events are strange things. They talk about generosity while swallowing caviar. But the art doesn't perform. It just exists." Her words cut more than she knew. Nicholas smirked faintly, though inside, something stirred unsteadily. "So you prefer honesty to spectacle?" "Yes." Few people ever answered him so quickly. His interest edged sharper. "What's your name?" "Elena," she replied. No last name. No pedigree stamped like a seal of approval. Just a first name spoken plainly. "Elena." He let the syllables linger. "And how did you end up here, Elena?" She glanced around, unbothered. "I was hired. Event staff. Last-minute replacement to help with the cataloging and displays. But when the shift ended, the curator offered to let me stay. I wanted to see what art looks like when no one is staring at it through museum glass." So she was staff. Lower than staff, perhaps. Temporary, substitute, uninvited. In his world, that should have ended the conversation. But Nicholas felt his pulse quicken. For once, someone wasn't here to orbit him. She was here by accident, by some wild turn nobody planned. And she spoke without veneer. "Then you're different from the others?" he murmured, studying her like she was the exhibit. Her lips curved, teasing. "Should I call that a compliment?" "Yes." A simple answer, steady, genuine. For a moment, silence soaked between them, charged and dangerous. Nicholas, so practiced at controlling every step, every word, suddenly felt undone by something as simple as eye contact. He imagined leaning closer, smelling the faint trace of her perfume, confessing things he'd buried. He didn't move. He couldn't. But just then his mother's voice cracked the spell. Nicholas. He straightened instinctively, mask snapping back into place. Lydia Sterling, elegant, commanding, glided toward them, her jewels catching light like weapons. Her eyes swept Elena once, dismissive, sharp, final, before landing on Nicholas. Senator Myers wants a word about the new partnership. Come. Nicholas glanced at Elena one last time. She met his look with a quiet knowing, as though she understood the world would yank him back before he could withstand it. He turned and followed his mother, but inside, something burned. That night, when the party ended and the glass doors of his penthouse shut tight, Nicholas Sterling, who never risked anything he couldn't control, stood awake until dawn with one impossible thought. Why did it feel like I would risk it all for her? Nicholas Sterling was a man sculpted by schedules. His days were predetermined months in advance. Board meetings, investor luncheons, charity dinners, strategic handshakes timed like orchestras. Disruption had no place in his world. And yet, since the gala, nothing inside him followed schedule. Every glance at the city skyline reminded him of her. Every polished conversation reminded him of her words. The art doesn't perform. He tried to drown her voice beneath contracts and numbers, but the silence afterward echoed too loudly. It wasn't desire in the usual sense, not the easy indulgence he'd entertained before. It was something more dangerous, hunger for realness in a life dedicated entirely to pretenses. By the fifth day awake past midnight, Nicholas snapped. He called in his private secretary and leaned against his desk, voice calm but threaded with urgency. Pull the guest and staff records from last week's Sterling Gala. The assistant raised a careful brow. For an internal audit? Nicholas' tone sharpened. Pull the names. Cross-reference temporary event staff. Find an Elena, dark hair, mid-20s, signed on under curator clearance. There was no hesitation once commands were issued. Within an hour, her profile was on his desk. Elena Reyes. A graduate art student. Working 2 part-time jobs. No record of lineage, no connections to high society. Just a face card photo stapled to her application. Too ordinary for his world but suddenly more striking than any model in his phone. Nicholas stared at the page longer than he meant to. It would be reckless to follow the impulse. His reputation was already brittle under scrutiny. The last thing he needed was a scandal involving event staff. But recklessness was the very thing tempting him like never before. That weekend he bought a painting. Not for its brushstrokes, not for its artist. Simply because it had been catalogued by her at the gala. Then he called the gallery where it sat. I'd like it delivered tomorrow, Nicholas said over the phone. And I'd like Ms. Reyes specifically to handle its transport and placement. The curator stammered. She's part-time, hardly a formal installer. I don't like strangers handling my acquisitions, Nicholas cut in, his tone the iron edge that silenced complaints. Ms. Reyes. Tomorrow 10 a.m. Elena tried to tell herself it was just another delivery. She rode up his private elevator with the painting cradled in white gloves, her stomach twisting as steel walls reflected her anxious expression. When the doors opened, she stepped into his world for the first time outside of the gala. A penthouse of glass and marble, perched high above the city like it belonged to gods instead of men. Nicholas was waiting. He wore no tie this time, sleeves folded at his elbows, though elegance still clung to him effortlessly. He offered her a faint smile. Ms. Reyes. Mr. Sterling, she said quietly, her voice steadier than she expected. She set the painting against a wall, positioning it with care. You remembered me. Her hands paused mid-motion before she straightened to face him. Hard not to. You're Nicholas Sterling. The way she said it, without awe, without calculation, made him smirk faintly. And you're Elena Reyes. Which is why you're here. She frowned. You requested me for this delivery? I trust your eye, he replied smoothly. But then, more softly, and I wanted to see you again. Elena's breath caught. Her instinct screamed to leave to protect herself. She didn't belong here. He was born of towers, she was born of sidewalks cracked with struggle. But part of her couldn't look away from the way his gaze, impeccably powerful in public, now carried something raw, almost pleading. "Why me?" she asked finally. He hesitated. He could have lied, offered charm. Instead he said the truth. "Because you're the first person in years who looked at me, and didn't see Sterling Global." Her pulse raced at the honesty. And when he stepped closer, not touching, just near enough to let the weight of it fill the air, she swallowed hard. "This isn't smart," she said softly. "No," he admitted. "It isn't." His eyes held hers. "But maybe I'm done living smart." The silence between them crackled with vulnerability neither dared name. And Elena, who had spent her whole life balancing caution, was shaken most by the realization that she wanted him to keep looking at her like this. But before she could reply, his phone buzzed at the table. He didn't move, though she saw the name on the glowing screen. Lydia Sterling. His mother. The Queen still pulling strings. The moment broke. He exhaled sharply, stepping back. "You should go," he murmured. Elena nodded, steadying her breath as she gathered her things. She left the penthouse with his gaze burning into her back, a fire she swore she wouldn't let spread, but already knew was impossible to contain. That night, Nicholas sat alone in his glass fortress, staring at her number typed into his phone. He hadn't asked for it, but of course he had it. He always found what he wanted. Yet this felt different. To call her would mean crossing a line no Sterling ever should. He sat awake until dawn, the city shimmering beneath his floor-to-ceiling windows. And for the first time, the thought that haunted him wasn't about profit, wasn't about markets, wasn't about power. It was Elena's voice, quiet but piercing. "Art doesn't lie. People do." Nicholas closed his eyes, realizing the darkest truth of his empire, that every pristine tower, every polished smile, every deal signed in his name had been a lie. And the only glimpse of honesty he'd found was in the eyes of a woman he was never supposed to want. Nicholas Sterling had always considered himself master of control. But days after Elena left his penthouse, he realized she'd stolen something impossible to reclaim. His thoughts, once disciplined to financial forecasts and market shares, now frayed into images of her, the quiet curve of her smile, the honesty in her voice, the gravity of her presence. He told himself to focus. To bury the impulse the way he buried every other inconvenient desire. But wanting her wasn't like wanting a yacht, an island, or another tower. This wasn't an acquisition. This was need, dangerous, raw, irrational. And when Nicholas Sterling wanted something, history showed he always found a way. The excuse came 3 days later at the art gallery. He knew she rotated shifts there between classes. He arrived unannounced, stepping into the stone hall where afternoon light spilled across brushstrokes centuries old. Elena was arranging a new exhibit, her hair pulled loosely back, her attire practical yet graceful. As he approached, she noticed him instantly, pausing mid-motion. "Is this stalking Mr. Sterling?" she teased, though her guardedness showed in the careful set of her jaw. He smirked faintly. "If it were, I'd be worse at hiding it." "Bold to admit that," she replied. "Bolder not to care." Their eyes locked, silence stretching between them with a pull neither could deny. She finally looked away, busying herself with the labels. "You shouldn't be here." "Why not?" "This," she gestured subtly at the marble walls and priceless canvases, "is my world. Temporary staff. Art. Simplicity. Yours?" she trailed off, shaking her head lightly. "Yours is skyscrapers and tabloids and high society. They don't mix, Nicholas." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "And yet here we are." Her chest tightened. The air hummed with tension, daring her to confess what she didn't want to admit, that she thought about him too, that her sleepless nights were filled with the press of his gaze. But instead she steadied herself. "You're engaged, aren't you?" she asked suddenly. Nicholas flinched, though subtly, his eyes hardening. "It's complicated." Complicated is just a softer word for lies. Her bluntness pierced him. No one ever spoke to him like that. Businessmen groveled, women orbited, even senators tempered their sentences. But she stripped him with simplicity. He both hated it and craved it. "I was arranged to Lydia Spencer when I was 20, he admitted finally. "It was a merger before it was a marriage. We smiled for magazines played the role. But it has never been love. Not once. Only performance. Her brow furrowed, her arms crossed as though shielding herself. Does she know you think that? A dry, humorless smile touched his lips. She doesn't have to. Lydia knows what appearances are worth. Elena shook her head. And now you want to tear into something real, even if it collapses everything you've built. His gaze seared into her. Yes. If that something real, is you. The breath caught in her throat. God help her, she wanted to believe him. She wanted to fall, even as every instinct screamed she couldn't. Stop, she whispered, though the word had no strength. This can't happen. Nicholas tilted his head, eyes unwavering. It already is. By the following week, whispers had begun to circulate. It wasn't public, not yet, but in the circles of the wealthy nothing remained hidden. Associates noticed Nicholas slipping away from board dinners. His mother noticed his attention wandering during galas. Lydia herself noticed his late nights, his restless answers. One evening at dinner in the Sterling estate, Lydia fixed him with a cutting look. Her voice had an elegance sharpened to knives. Nicholas, I sincerely hope the absurd gossip I've been hearing is nothing more. He didn't flinch. Depends on the gossip. Your fascination with some lower-class art student. Temporary staff. Elena, is it? Do I even need to dignify this with correction? He leaned back, calm but deliberate. You sound worried, mother. I'm furious, not worried. Do you understand how fragile reputations are in this family? They'll excuse mistresses in Monte Carlo, but falling for staff. Her chin lifted, disdain slicing the air. They'll call it reckless, pathological, humiliating. You will not risk Sterling Global on this indulgence. Nicholas's eyes hardened, steady but glinting with fire. You built our fortune on control. I will not spend my life dying inside it. You can't love below your league, she hissed. It isn't done. He stood then, his voice low but thunderous. Maybe it has to be done. Her glass clinked sharply as she set it down. But he didn't stay to hear the rest. Outside, on the steps of the Sterling mansion, Nicholas clenched his fists as city air swept his face. His phone buzzed, an unknown number. He answered, and when Elena's voice sounded timidly on the other end, his hardened chest softened instantly. I shouldn't be calling, she whispered, but I needed. Say it, he urged. Her silence trembled through the line. Finally, I needed you to know I can't stop thinking about you. For the first time in years, Nicholas Sterling nearly lost his breath. Elena, he whispered, closing his eyes. If I choose you, I lose everything. Name, empire, family. But I think I'm ready to. Her voice cracked softly with fear. And what if I'm not ready to let you? His jaw tightened, his free hand pressing against the railing. Then I'll wait until you are. But Elena, his voice broke its control, shattering into a rare vulnerability. You're the only thing I can't unsee. The only thing worth risking everything for. On the other end she inhaled sharply. A shaky, terrified sound. But not a refusal. Not yet. That night, Nicholas stared out the glass walls of his penthouse, the city glittering beneath like a kingdom he was ready to surrender. And he realized with startling clarity the truth he had been circling all along. The rich risk everything for love they can't have because it's the one thing that makes them human. And Nicholas Sterling was already human enough to break. The first crack appeared on the front page of the London Times. It wasn't scandal yet, but it was bait. Nicholas Sterling spotted again at gallery event. Mystery woman raises questions. The photo was grainy, snapped from across the street. But anyone who knew Elena's outline would recognize her. Nicholas stared at the paper in his private office, jaw tight, pulse steady with rage. He knew this was Lydia's maneuver. She was testing the waters, releasing the first drop of poison to see how quickly it spread. That evening when he visited Elena's café job, she met him at the corner table, her eyes wide with fear. She held the folded article in her trembling hands. This is my life now, she whispered harshly. I'm background noise for society gossip? I told you, Nicholas, I can't survive in your world. He watched her, his chest tightening. Then don't. Survive in mine. Her brow furrowed. You are your world. He reached across the small table, his fingers curling around hers, grounding her frantic energy into something anchored. No. I was born into it, raised inside it, but it isn't me. You've seen more of me in weeks than they've seen in 40 years. Her lip trembled, but she shook her head sharply. What do you think happens next? The press circles me. Lydia destroys me. Your investors call me poison. You risk everything you've built for someone who doesn't belong to your league. That's the point, he murmured, leaning closer. Love isn't about leagues. Love is about finding the one person so dangerous to your control that you'd risk everything just to feel alive with them. The words burned into her. She hated how they set her heart alight even as every rational instinct screamed to run. Nick, she whispered shakily. This is madness. His gaze softened, lingering on her face, memorizing every detail. Yes, beautiful madness. By the next week, Lydia doubled her assault. Invitations Nicholas had always received suddenly didn't arrive. Galas, meetings, premieres. Former allies now avoided his calls. Sterling Global's board demanded explanations for his reckless absences. Nicholas sat through the meeting with ice in his veins as one director cleared his throat. You must focus, Nicholas. A Sterling heir risking his name for a fling? That's not leadership. That's weakness. He rose from his chair slowly, his sharp suit catching the boardroom's clinical light. His voice cut clean across the table. Weakness is lying to yourself until you rot from the inside out. I'd rather risk everything and be alive than pretend another decade for your applause. Silence flooded the room. Half the directors paled. Half scowled. But Nicholas knew what he had done. He declared war not just with Lydia, but with the entire Sterling dynasty's legacy. And for the first time he didn't care. Elena, meanwhile, struggled beneath the weight of constant whispers. A student in her program confronted her in the library. So, is it true? You're Sterling's mistress. The word mistress stung like hot metal, and no matter how she denied it, the smirk in the student's eyes didn't fade. She fled the library that day, heart cracking, lungs aching. When Nicholas found her hours later sitting alone by the river, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, his own chest felt like it was breaking. You should leave me, she murmured when he sat beside her. Go back. Pretend none of this happened. Save yourself. He caught her gaze with iron steadiness. You're asking me to walk away from the first thing that has ever been real in my life. I can't. I won't. Tears welled in her eyes, slipping against the cool wind. You'll lose everything. Maybe everything I've built deserves to be lost. Because it was built for them, not for me. He brushed a strand of her hair back gently, his hand trembling from not desire but conviction. Elena, you are my empire now. She broke then, sobbing into his chest, clutching his suit desperately as though he was both salvation and destruction at once. The whispers became shouts soon after. Paparazzi hounded them, blocking the café, chasing her down streets with cameras. Every social page screamed about Nicholas Sterling's forbidden romance with an art student. Rumors twisted into ugly narratives: gold digger, homewrecker, opportunist. Elena wanted to disappear into shadows, but Nicholas refused to let her fold. He appeared with her, hand in hers, shielding her against flashes of light and cruel laughter. He stopped hiding, and that became the greatest scandal of all, seeing a Sterling heir not merely indulging a fling, but standing proudly with love beneath his league. It terrified her. It exhilarated her. One night, when they finally slipped into the back entrance of her apartment to escape the circus, Nicholas kissed her in the dim stairwell with a desperation that shook her. Their lips crashed, heated, trembling, a collision of fear and longing. We're already in the fire, he whispered against her mouth. Then let's keep burning. She held him, chest to chest, her own broken breath spilling against him. And for the first time Elena stopped resisting. She kissed him back with equal hunger, driven not by recklessness but by surrender to the truth she'd denied. They couldn't have each other. And yet they could no longer live without each other. It was then that Elena finally understood the truth Nicholas had carried all along. The rich risk everything for love not because they want scandal, but because even an empire is nothing against the desperate need to be seen. It began with a headline that no amount of lawyers could soften. Sterling heir betrays legacy. Nicholas Sterling's secret romance exposed. Unlike earlier whispers and blurry photos, This time the article contained sharp, undeniable evidence. Images of Nicholas and Elena leaving her apartment at dawn, his hand brushing her cheek with tenderness that could not be mistaken for happenstance. The words underneath weren't careful, they were designed to eviscerate. Heir to one of Britain's oldest fortunes chooses art student over empire. Sterling family remains ashamed and appalled. Nicholas unfolded the paper in his penthouse like a soldier reading his execution notice. He wasn't shocked, he had been awaiting Lydia's big strike. But anger roared through him not at the exposure, but at the way her name was targeted. Sophia had been scandal. Elena was humiliation. The columns reduced her to caricature. A woman beneath him. A gold digger. A fall from grace incarnate. Control was gone. Now came the choice, submit or defy. At Elena's café it was chaos. Paparazzi swarmed, sticking lenses through the windows, faces pressed against the glass like scavengers. Customers fled within minutes, unwilling to be associated with her. Signs were taped on the door overnight with words scrawled cruelly, "Mistress." Below him. Shame. She tried to stay composed, but when one cameraman shouted directly at her, "How much did he pay you to ruin his mother's empire?" Her trembling hands snapped the cup she was holding, coffee spilling down her apron. She fled to the back room, crouching low, breathing sharp and ragged. When Nicholas arrived minutes later, cameras erupting around his black car, the room fell into stunned silence. He stormed past flashing lights and blocked the doorway with his broad frame. "Not one more photo," he growled to the swarm, his voice so low and lethal that for once they stepped back. Inside he found her pressed against the wall, eyes red, hands shaking. He knelt down against her trembling form, taking her wrist gently. "Elena." Her words cracked apart. "This is destroying me, Nicholas. I can't do this. I can't." His chest tightened, but his answer was steady. "Then I'll let them destroy me instead." Her head jerked up. "What?" "I'll step down," he said simply. "I'll walk away from Sterling Global. I'll cut ties with the board, the dynasty, all of it. My title, my authority, gone. Let them bury me if staying with you means losing those things. Because you're worth more." She stared at him, speechless. "You'd give up everything, for me?" He touched her hand carefully, deliberate. "For love. For the one thing I can't buy, can't fake, can't control." "Yes." Her tears spilled over as his words sank in. She wanted to stop him, to scream that he was insane. But in her heart, a truth cut louder. She wanted him too much to refuse it. For the first time she didn't whisper this must stop. Instead, she sobbed into his chest, clutching his shirt as if to anchor herself against the collapse outside. And Nicholas Sterling, once untouchable, felt his empire slipping away, yet for the first time felt alive enough to fight for something he truly wanted. Lydia's fury was unmatched. When Nicholas officially announced his resignation as CEO of Sterling Global, stepping down from the throne of glass towers, the high society headlines blared with shockwaves. Lydia confronted him privately in their family's London estate, her venom sharpened like steel. "You've disgraced us," she hissed. 4 generations built Sterling Global. And you throw it away, for her?" He met her eyes calmly. "I didn't throw it away, Mother. I gave it willingly. Because I'd rather have my soul intact than inherit an empire built on misery." Her jaw twitched. "You think she will save you? She'll leave you when the money runs dry. You'll be nothing. Do you understand that?" He stepped closer, his towering presence swallowing her fury. "Then let me be nothing, if nothing is what it takes to love her." Lydia's silence curdled, her diamond rings glinting under the light like claws. And though she left the confrontation without another word, Nicholas knew the war wasn't over. The dynasty might release him, but Lydia herself never would. Yet in the quiet afterward, something shifted. Nicholas spent more time with Elena, not in penthouses or art galleries but in spaces her world carved. Small kitchens, late-night walks, library tables. He drove Matteo to school one morning in his black rolls, absurdly out of place in the modest car line, and Elena laughed for the first time in weeks. The media circus continued, but Nicholas no longer cared about appearances. He gave interviews where he didn't apologize. "Yes, I love her. No, I don't regret it." Every tabloid spun it into noise, but to Elena, his public defiance felt like protection she desperately needed. she told him one night, curled against him in her dim apartment. "I was so sure you'd break, that the Empire would win." He kissed her hair. "I was so sure I'd never risk. And then you happened." Her whisper trembled. "What if the world never forgives us?" His jaw pressed to her forehead. "Then forget the world. We'll build our own." And she realized then why the rich risked everything for love they could not have. Because even billions meant nothing if they ended their lives unloved, untouched, unseen. And Nicholas Sterling had finally decided he'd rather die stripped of titles than live untouched. The lawsuit came like a dagger slipped beneath the ribs. Elena had expected more whispers, another wave of tabloids, maybe another fabricated headline. What she hadn't expected was a thick packet of official documents slid across her café counter by a courier in a gray suit. Sterling versus Reyes. Lydia herself had filed it. The charges weren't criminal, but they were designed to bleed her out. Defamation, interference with marriage, damages for emotional distress. The language was cold, clinical, and cruel. It painted Elena not only as a mistress but as a calculating predator. She sought to profit from the Sterling name. She manipulated Nicholas into reckless decisions. Half-truths threaded with lies, polished just enough to appear legitimate. Elena sat at her counter long after the man left, the packet heavy in her trembling hands. Everything inside her wanted to crumple it, burn it. But the words screamed louder than fire could cleanse. They carried the weight of Lydia Sterling's entire empire pressing down on her. By evening, Nicholas was at her door, storming into her apartment with fire in his veins, the papers already in his hand. "She's going too far," he hissed, pacing the small kitchen like a caged lion. "This isn't about appearances anymore. This is war." Elena stood behind the counter, voice trembling. "Maybe she's right." He froze, spinning toward her. "What?" Her shoulders shook, but she forced herself to continue. "What if I am ruining your life? What if she's not lying? I've cost you your company, your reputation, your family name. And now, this." She gestured at the papers with a sharp motion, her throat tight. "Your mother isn't just fighting for Sterling Global. She's fighting to erase me. And she might win." Nicholas closed the distance in 3 strides, his hands gripping her arms so firmly she felt the weight of all her fear anchoring against him. His voice broke with low, raw conviction. "Listen to me. She can't erase you. No one can. You've given me more life in months than my family gave me in decades. Everything she says is a lie. She's terrified of being exposed. The truth is you. It's us." Her lip trembled, but she shook her head, pulling away from his grip. "Nicholas, you can just pay her off. And this. Save yourself. I'm not worth this destruction." His chest rose sharply. His fists clenched. "Don't you dare say you're not worth it. Don't you reduce yourself to the lies she spins." Her tears spilled then, hot and unstoppable. And she whispered between sobs, "Why is it so hard to believe I deserve you?" Nicholas caught her face in his hands then, his voice breaking. "Because the world told you that. It told you that women like you don't belong with men like me. But the truth is, men like me don't deserve women like you. I'm only standing because of you." Her eyes closed, her body shaking beneath the gravity of his words. He pressed his forehead against hers, whispering, "I'll fight this. Not with money, the money's done, but with truth. And if I lose everything, at least I'll lose it knowing I chose love over lies." The hearing was scheduled within weeks. Lydia, of course, arrived in silk and diamonds, her lawyers cutting figures as sharp as their suits. She sat poised, her gaze a dagger every time it flicked toward Elena, who wore a simple black dress, her trembling hidden behind stubborn determination. Nicholas sat beside her, his hand steady on hers, anchoring her even as whispers filled the courtroom. He leaned in once, whispering, "They don't matter. Only us." The proceedings began. Lydia's team painted Elena as ambitious, manipulative, a girl reaching above her station to line her pockets with sterling fortune. They spoke of reputation, family honor, the fragility of dynasties. They twisted every truth into poison. And then came Nicholas's turn. When the judge allowed his statement, he stood slowly, tall and commanding, not as the sterling heir he'd been groomed to be, but as a man stripped of empire, left only with his honesty. For years, he began, his voice resonant. I lived in luxury that suffocated me. I had fortunes, titles, towers. But none of it mattered. Because without love, power is a prison, not a gift. Lydia Sterling has called this woman a manipulator, a threat unworthy of our family's name. But the truth is, Elena Reyes is the only one who ever saw me as more than a name. She didn't climb into this life, I pulled her into it. If that is a crime, consider me guilty. But don't call her less. Don't strip her of dignity to preserve lies. The only dignity worth preserving is the dignity of choosing love when it costs everything. The room went silent save for shuffling papers and a few murmurs. Lydia's jaw was tight, her eyes narrowed, but Nicholas's words had landed. Elena, squeezing his hand under the table, felt her chest tear with pride and terror all at once. That evening, outside the courthouse, cameras swarmed them like predators. Shouted questions filled the air. Elena froze under the lights, her body stiffening with fear. But Nicholas raised their joined hands deliberately for every camera to see. This is the truth, he declared loudly. Not scandal. Not lies. This is love. And if you think that makes me foolish, then so be it. Flashes blinded them, voices roared, but in that moment, Elena realized something she hadn't before. Nicholas was no longer protecting her. He was standing with her. Equal. Defiant. And inside, beneath her exhaustion and fear, she felt a spark of strength ignite. The hearing would not be decided quickly. Lydia had woven too much theater into the process. But something undeniable had shifted. Nicholas had made himself vulnerable in a way money-hungry courts couldn't twist. And Elena had stood, trembling but unbroken, at his side. That night in the quiet of her apartment, as city lights pulsed outside, she whispered into his chest, "Maybe I can survive this. Maybe we can." Nicholas's arm tightened protectively around her, his voice low against her hair. "We already are. Because they can strip titles, drag names, sue fortunes, but they can't touch us unless we let them." Her eyes closed, and for the first time she believed him more than she feared Lydia. For the first time she saw why the rich risk everything for love they can't have. Not because it's safe, not because it's wise, but because surviving without it is worse than losing everything with it. Lydia Grant Sterling never wasted ammunition. She aimed only for the heart. And when the courtroom theatrics didn't fully crush Elena, Lydia pivoted to something far more sinister: family. It began with subtle leaks. An anonymous source dug into public records, publishing stories about Elena's troubled adolescence. Her father's debts. Her mother's illness. A late rent eviction when she was only 17. Old wounds dragged mercilessly into the spotlight, framed as evidence of a pattern of desperation. Soon after, tabloids printed the cruelest headline yet: Elena Reyes, a family of failure. Elena read it at her café counter, her hands trembling so violently she nearly dropped the paper. It wasn't her shame she feared, it was Mateo's. He was only 16, too young to carry scars the world would forge for him now. Her worst fear materialized when Mateo came home pale, slamming his backpack onto the floor. "They said it at school," he muttered, voice breaking. "That we're trash. That Nick's just keeping us like pets until he gets bored." His fists clenched, his young face twisted with shame he didn't deserve. "I hate this." Elena pulled him close, holding his shaking shoulders while her own tears burned unseen. For years she had fought to give him normalcy, to keep their lives safe and invisible. And now Nicholas's world, the one she longed for and feared equally, was poisoning his too. That night, when Nicholas came over, she cornered him in her small kitchen. Her voice was raw, her eyes swollen. "This has to end." Nicholas froze, his jaw tightening. "Elena. Lydia is targeting Mateo now," she snapped. "He's 16. He doesn't deserve this circus. He didn't choose this, Nick, I did. And it's killing him." Nicholas stepped closer, his voice trembling with fury. "Then let me protect him." "How?" she cried. "You already gave up your company. You have no shield left. What can you do? Fight every word, every whisper, every comment thrown at a child. You can't stop her. You can't." Silence. His fists balled at his sides, his jaw locked, his gaze burning with helplessness, the same helplessness she'd felt all along. The truth trembled from her throat. "You keep asking me to fight with you, but every time I stand she moves the battle to my brother. What am I supposed to do, Nicholas? Watch him get crushed so I can keep loving you. He swallowed thickly, his voice breaking. So what are you saying, that you're leaving me? Her whole body shook, every nerve screaming no, but her voice cracked into betrayal against her own heart. I might have to. It was agony to say it aloud, agony to see the pain flicker across his face like she'd stabbed him herself. Nicholas blinked hard, stepping back as if giving her space would keep her whole. His voice dropped, ragged. If leaving me saves him, then I'll let you. But don't pretend it's what either of us wants. And then he left, his tall figure silhouetted like a fallen giant against her narrow hallway. The days that followed were the darkest Elena had ever endured. She drifted numbly through shifts at the café, camera still hounding her every step. Matteo barely spoke, burying himself into schoolwork as though silence might make the shame recede. At night, Elena lay awake staring at her cracked ceiling, whispering to the dark, am I protecting him or destroying him worse by walking away from the only man who's ever fought for me? Nicholas, alone in his penthouse, was unraveling in his own way. The board had severed him completely. The sterling name, once iconic, was dragged through mockery attached to his forbidden obsession. Lydia gloated in interviews, framing his downfall as a tragic consequence of weakness. But through it all, one truth gutted him most, Elena's absence. He replayed every moment, the pier, the stolen kisses, her eyes trembling with love she never dared name. He knew she hadn't left from lack of love. She had left from fear. And fear was the only opponent he hadn't yet learned how to crush. One Friday evening, Elena sat locking up the café alone when she saw a shadow through the glass. Nicholas was there, not in his flawless suits but in rolled sleeves and exhaustion. She froze in the doorway, torn between relief and heartbreak. I had to see you, he said, his voice low, steady but threaded with raw cracks. I told you, Nick, her whisper broke, this isn't safe. For who? He asked, stepping closer. For Matteo? I know. That's why I spoke to him. Her stomach lurched. What do you mean? Nicholas exhaled, eyes heavy but burning with conviction. I went to him. Not as Nicholas Sterling the Empire, but as Nicholas the man who loves his sister. I told him I'll take every blow if it means he doesn't have to. And Elena, he looked me in the eye and for the first time I saw he believed me. Her breath caught, eyes filling. Why would you do that? He stepped closer, now just feet away. Because I'm done letting fear run us. Lydia wins every time we give her permission to. But if we survive together, she loses. So I'm asking you, don't walk away. Don't give her victory. Her tears spilled as his words tore through her defenses. He cupped her cheek gently, his thumb brushing trembling skin. You want to protect your brother? So do I. You want peace? So do I. Then let's fight for it together. You don't have to risk it alone anymore. In that moment, something shifted in Elena. She realized the truth. Leaving him hadn't freed her brother from cruelty, it had only left them weaker. But together, with Nicholas standing at her side, shield raised against Lydia's fire, maybe, just maybe, they could endure. She collapsed into his embrace, sobbing against his chest. I don't want to leave you. You never will, he whispered fiercely into her hair. Not again. And though the war ahead still loomed, for the first time Elena decided, she wouldn't run. She would stand, trembling but unbroken, beside the man who risked everything because love wasn't a weakness. It was survival. For weeks, Elena had endured the arrows in silence. Whispered accusations at school meetings. Harassment outside her cafe. Her name twisted into caricature in tabloids. But something inside her had changed the night Nicholas showed up, when he told her that survival didn't come from running, it came from standing. Fear still churned in her chest, but beneath it, a stronger current rose, courage. Perhaps that was what Lydia had miscalculated. She had assumed Elena would break the way the poor often do when facing power, that she'd run, vanish, surrender in shame. But Lydia underestimated what love could ignite. It began with a single decision. Elena agreed to sit for an interview of her own. Not with a tabloid, not with a gossip channel, but with a small, respected independent paper. No handlers, no lawyers, no deal spinners. Only her words. When Nicholas heard, his protective instincts flared. Are you sure? He asked, voice low, concern etched into his every feature as he sat at her kitchen table. She'll come after you harder if you step into the spotlight yourself. She already has, Elena whispered. And I'm tired of letting her script my story. It's time I tell my own. His eyes lingered on her, both wary and proud. He reached across, taking her hand. Then say it boldly. I'll be right there. The morning of the interview, she wore nothing extravagant. Just a white blouse and jeans, hair down, simple and human. The journalist sat across from her in the café, recorder on the table, notebook poised. For a moment Elena's throat went dry with nerves. Ms. Reyes, the journalist began softly, why agree to speak now? Elena drew in a slow breath, then raised her eyes to meet the expectant gaze. For once she didn't shrink. Because for months, people have been telling my story for me. They call me names, make up motives, paint me as a villain in a play I never auditioned for. But here's the truth, I didn't chase Nicholas Sterling. I didn't want his fortune. I wanted my life, quiet, simple, honest. And then one night in a museum we spoke. That was the beginning, not a scandal. Not lies. Just two people who saw something real in each other. Her voice grew steadier with each sentence. I know it's easier to believe love is only possible between equals on paper. Wealth matching wealth, league matching league. But love doesn't ask permission from society. And when it comes, you can either deny it and suffocate or you can let it set you free. Nicholas risked everything because he wanted to live free. And I'm learning to do the same. The journalist blinked, struck not by the confession but by the quiet conviction radiating from her. This wasn't performance. This was a woman telling her raw truth. By the evening, excerpts from her interview had spread far beyond the small paper. People were unprepared for how disarmingly human she was. Her strength reframed her not as caricature, but as someone relatable, someone ordinary enough to reveal the extraordinary hypocrisy of Lydia's world. Some praised her courage. Some mocked still. But for the first time the narrative began to tilt. Lydia reacted with fury. In her penthouse she hurled a crystal glass against the marble wall, shards scattering like sparkling rage. She thinks she can speak her way out of shame, she snarled to her lawyer. Then we'll make her regret every word. But even as Lydia plotted retaliation, something irreversible had happened in society's perception. Elena's voice had refused to be silenced, and silence had always been the weapon wielded against women like her. Speaking, the very act of existing without shame, was rebellion enough. Elena didn't stop at the interview. Days later, she stood beside Nicholas at a charity event where he had once played the polished heir. Paparazzi cameras lined the entry like a gauntlet of fire. Her knees nearly buckled as shouts erupted. Elena! Mistress! Opportunist! Do you regret destroying the Sterlings? But Nicholas didn't flinch. He tightened his hand around hers, lifting it high. His voice rang out above the thunder. She isn't a scandal. She's my truth. At his side, Elena inhaled sharply, then straightened her shoulders. For the first time she turned toward the swarm and spoke herself. I'm not afraid of your labels anymore, she said clearly, her voice steady despite her shaking body. Say what you will. But the truth is simple, love is worth fighting for. And if that love threatens a dynasty built on control, maybe it's not love that's wrong, maybe it's the dynasty. Gasps rose. Some journalists faltered mid-shout. Cameras clicked, flashes burned, but Elena's words cut deeper than any headline. She hadn't just survived, she had claimed ground that Lydia never thought she would. Nicholas looked at her with something dangerously close to awe. Pride, yes, but also relief, as though he had been carrying the fight alone until this very moment. In that instant, Elena stopped being the woman he had to protect and became his partner in defiance. That night, back in the safety of her apartment, he kissed her with a hunger more profound than anything before, because it was no longer a kiss of saving or shielding. It was a kiss of equals. You've no idea how extraordinary you are, he whispered against her lips. Her hands tangled in his shirt as she pulled him closer. I'm finally starting to believe it. Because of you. No, he corrected gently, brushing his thumb against her cheek. Because of you. And they both knew Lydia could lash out again, could drag them back into court, could poison every headline. But something had shifted forever, Elena's willingness to stand. And when love stopped hiding, it became unstoppable. For the first time, Elena didn't feel like prey. She felt like fire. And Lydia, watching footage of the event play again on her television, wine glass trembling in her hand, realized with fury that her greatest threat wasn't Nicholas's rebellion. It was Elena's courage. Lydia Grant Sterling had never lost a war. She turned rivals into ruin, boardrooms into battlegrounds, and society itself into her stage. But for the first time she was being outmaneuvered not by another tycoon or dynasty family, but by a young woman she had dismissed as insignificant. The humiliation was unbearable. Her counterstrike was merciless. At dawn, Nicholas woke to the sound of his phone vibrating violently across the marble nightstand. A trusted ally on the other end of the line spoke in a hushed tone. "Nicholas, she's done it. Lydia bought airtime. A televised interview. She plans to expose Elena tonight. She's got her school records, her father's bankruptcy filings, her mother's medical debts. She'll drag every skeleton out of that girl's closet. The angle is brutal." Nicholas clenched the phone so tightly his knuckles whitened. His reflection in the glass wall showed a man on edge, jaw wired, blood humming with the kind of rage that only came from love cornered. "She won't destroy her," he growled. Then more to himself, "She can't." When Elena heard, she felt her world tilt. She sat in the café's backroom, her fingers tangled in her hair as she fought for air. Every private wound of her past, the years of holding Matteo together after their parents' collapse, the shame of eviction notices, the stigma of poverty, they weren't just memories. They were about to be spectacle. "Nick, she'll ruin me," Elena whispered when he arrived, his frame filling the doorway. Her voice quivered with the panic of a woman bracing for humiliation she couldn't stop. He dropped to his knees in front of her, taking her shaking hands. "She can't ruin you. Not if you refuse shame." Tears welled in her eyes. "You say that like it's so easy." "It isn't," he cut in, his voice trembling too. "It's the hardest thing. But Elena, listen to me, your past isn't poison. It's proof. Proof that you survived everything life threw at you. Proof that you earned your strength. She thinks dragging out your scars will make you small. But I see them as the reason you're extraordinary." Elena pressed her lips shut, her whole body trembling, absorbing his words like oxygen she'd never known she needed. Then Nicholas added, almost in a whisper, "If she goes on TV tonight, then so will we." Her eyes widened. "What?" "We'll answer her in real time. We'll sit side by side and speak truth into the same cameras. She'll throw venom, we'll show reality." Elena shook her head, fear and awe warring inside her. "Nick, that will obliterate the last of your name. The dynasty, your reputation." He smiled faintly, a smile laced with both pain and liberation. "My name hasn't been mine for years. But you? You made me Nicholas again. Not Sterling. Me. That's the name I'm willing to fight for." That night, across the city, Lydia's televised special lit up screens. She sat dazzling in diamonds, her voice honey-sweet as venom dripped from her words. "She targeted my son," Lydia cooed with calculated grief. "She clawed from poverty into our dynasty. It isn't romance. It's opportunism. This is what happens when marriages are poisoned by outsiders." But before the broadcast could monopolize the story, Nicholas and Elena appeared live on an independent feed. They sat close together, Elena's hand folded into his visibly, her trembling obscured by his steady grip. Nicholas looked into the camera with a fire that no boardroom had ever seen. "My mother believes wealth gives her control of people's stories. She's wrong. And tonight we'll tell you the truth she's terrified of." Elena swallowed hard, then raised her eyes too. She felt her body shaking but pushed through. "Yes, I'm Elena Reyes. Yes, I was poor. Yes, my family suffered. My parents struggled and I fought for my little brother when we had nothing. Those are facts. But they're not shame. They're survival. They made me who I am. And Nicholas didn't fall for me because I'm perfect. He fell because I'm real." Her voice broke. Her hands trembled. But she never looked away from the camera. "And I won't apologize for love. Not to Lydia Sterling. Not to anyone." The feed spread like wildfire. Across social media, across the city, conversation shifted. People weren't seeing a caricature. They were seeing a human being daring to speak her scars aloud without flinching. And Nicholas beside her, nodding, holding her hand firmly, cemented the message. Their love wasn't scandal. It was defiance. By morning the comparisons were everywhere. Lydia's venomous elegance against Elena's trembling authenticity. One crafted cold. The other raw, undeniable. And in that contrast Lydia lost. For the first time high society whispered in Lydia's absence instead of her presence. She looks desperate. She looks afraid. Perhaps this time she went too far. Lydia Sterling had underestimated truth. Elena awoke in Nicholas's arms, the weight of exhaustion lifting for the first time in months. She watched him sleep, his strong features softened into peace. She thought of everything he'd lost, his empire, reputation, safety nets, and how he hadn't flinched. He had risked it all not for spectacle but for her. And for the first time she whispered the word she had been too afraid to say. I love you. Nicholas stirred, smiling faintly against the morning light. I know, he murmured groggily, then pulled her closer. She kissed his brow, whispering against his skin, but I'm ready to stop being afraid of saying it. The morning after their live broadcast, the city woke to a startling reversal. 4 months, the tabloids had feasted on Nicholas Sterling's downfall, on Elena's supposed opportunism, on Lydia's careful spin of betrayal and shame. But today it was different. The front page of the London Herald read, Elena Reyes speaks, poverty, survival and the truth about Sterling love. Instead of mockery the tone was steadier, almost reverent. Quotes from Elena's trembling but fearless words filled the columns. Those are facts. But they're not shame. They're survival. The same sentiment echoed across headlines. Raw honesty beats dynasty elegance. Human courage topples perfection. Public opinion was shifting. For once, Lydia wasn't winning. Lydia raged inside her mansion, slamming papers against marble countertops as her lawyer tried to reassure her. But her fury couldn't be contained. They made fools believe, she hissed, pacing like a caged tiger. She used her weakness like a weapon. Her lawyer cleared his throat carefully. We may have overplayed our position. The court of public opinion is pivoting. Investors are distancing themselves, not from Nicholas but from you. Lydia froze, stunned by the betrayal she'd never considered possible. From me? Yes, Mrs. Sterling. The man's voice was apologetic, cautious. They don't want to be associated with cruelty. The interviews made Elena sympathetic. She's no longer the villain in this story. If anything, he hesitated, then added, people are calling you the villain. The word struck Lydia like a curse. For the first time in decades, she no longer commanded admiration but distrust. Her carefully constructed empire of appearances had cracked. And Nicholas? He had walked away from hers long ago, which freed him to rise from the rubble. In a small studio the next week, Nicholas and Elena did one final interview, on their terms. The journalist asked the question on everyone's mind. Mr. Sterling, you gave up your company, your inheritance, your entire dynasty for a love the world told you couldn't have. Why risk everything? Nicholas glanced at Elena, her hand folded warmly in his lap. He turned back to the camera, his voice certain. Because wealth without love isn't wealth, it's chains. 4 years I lived surrounded by everything people envy, towers of glass, meals of gold, parties glittering with power. But every night ended in silence. Then one night I met Elena. She looked at me and didn't see Sterling Global, she saw me. And in that moment nothing else mattered anymore. Why risk everything? Because without love, I'd never have had anything real in the first place. Elena squeezed his hand, her voice soft but steady. And love isn't about leagues. It isn't about fortune or families. It's about choice. And we choose each other. The interviewer nodded, visibly moved. The cameras clicked off, and Nicholas leaned into Elena's ear with a whisper only she could hear. We won, not because the world approved but because we stopped apologizing. For once, Elena smiled through tears. We really did. Months passed. The lawsuits dwindled, Lydia retreated into bitter silence, and Sterling Global adjusted to life without Nicholas. Rumors of family strife remained, whispers of power struggles continued, but for Nicholas and Elena, they no longer mattered. Life became smaller, quieter, and infinitely richer. Nicholas took consulting work, guiding young entrepreneurs without the suffocating weight of dynasties. Elena reopened her café, her shelves stocked and her staff smiling again, customers more loyal than before. People came not just for coffee, but for the quiet inspiration of the woman who had stared down power and refused shame. Matteo walked taller at school. His friends no longer mocked, some even envied him. In whispered tones they called his sister brave. At home, Nicholas and Elena made dinners together, burnt toast included. They filled the silence of her modest apartment with laughter, kisses, and the kind of freedom Nicholas had never known in his towers. One evening, under warm lamplight after closing the café, Nicholas pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. He didn't get down on one knee, because he didn't need to. He simply looked at her with sincerity burning through his eyes. "Elena," he said, "I've risked everything for you, and I'd do it all again. But now I'm asking for the only thing I've ever truly wanted. Not the empire. Not the crowds. Just this, forever with you." Her lips trembled as tears welled, her hands covering her mouth before she whispered hoarsely, "Yes, yes." Nicholas slid the ring onto her finger, a simple band lined with truth, not spectacle. She threw her arms around him, crying and laughing at once. And his embrace tightened, lifting her slightly from the floor as if to prove to the universe that she was all he'd fought for, and all he needed. The wedding wasn't a gala or a media circus. It was a quiet ceremony in her café's garden, Matteo standing proudly beside them, friends gathered close. There were no chandeliers, no diamond-draped aristocrats. Just sunlight, vows spoken with trembling voices, and the exquisite simplicity of two people who had lost everything glamorous but found everything true. When Nicholas kissed his bride, the crowd erupted with genuine applause, a sound louder than any corporate cheer he had ever known. Later that night, as they walked under stars with fingers intertwined, Elena whispered softly, "Do you regret it? Not having the towers? Not having the empire?" Nicholas pulled her hand gently to his lips, kissing the ring now shining on her finger. "No," he murmured, "because what I have now, your love, this life, is the only wealth worth keeping. The rich risk everything for love they can't have, Elena. And the truth is, that love was the only thing I ever truly wanted." She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder, tears warming her smile. And beneath the endless stars, Nicholas Sterling, once heir to the empire, now conqueror of his own heart, walked into forever with the one woman who made risking everything worth it.